Do you ever find yourself saying yes when you mean to say no, or no when you mean to say yes? Or sometimes you find yourself very lonely or complaining about not having enough friends or people you can trust, yet you have a hard time letting people in the first place or getting attached to others? Well, that has something to do with what therapists call personal boundaries. And I think of personal boundaries as an invisible line we draw around ourselves that dictate where we stand with how we do relationships and what we're comfortable with and how we express our needs. There's a phrase that I talk to my clients about, and that is we teach other people how to treat us, right? As therapists, we really try to help clients navigate their personal boundaries and really how to communicate those boundaries with others in a way that's respectful, loving, and gets their needs met. The problem with boundaries is a lot of times we don't set them in the first place, we're not being very clear, and so they're very ambiguous, right? And this creates something called porous or permeable boundaries, right? Where other people might violate our boundaries without even necessarily meaning to because they weren't clear about where we stand in the first place on these things. And so then it creates a lot more work to then go back and then reaffirm or reset our boundaries. It's much harder to do than just setting them right in the first place. So the thing to understand about boundaries is they're not a one-size-fits-all approach, right? Boundaries encompass a lot of different areas of our lives, and there's something I call boundary domains. And there's really 6 that come to top of mind, and those are physical, emotional, intellectual, sexual, material, and time, right? And so we think about our boundaries as being either undeveloped, developed, or rigid, right? And so if we're looking at something like physical boundaries, if we have undeveloped boundaries or we haven't really communicated or worked out where our own comfort level is in that domain, then when it comes to our relationships, we may get uncomfortable because we haven't set the expectation for things like personal proximity or touch, and when it's appropriate to be touched and how often. Even in a marriage, right, where your mood is at. If there's times where you don't want to be touched, helping your partner understand that and when you're okay with it or what kind of touch, right? Or even friendships or hugs. Are you a handshake person? Are you a hug person? Are you a fist bump person? We oftentimes set these subtle boundaries non-verbally, right? When we first greet someone, we might do the fist bump or we might do the handshake. Sometimes I'll get it mixed up. I'll go in for a fist bump, they go for the hand, and then it's just kind of a mess. That's a very small example, but we do teach other people how to treat us. We teach other people how we do relationships by the way that we engage with them. And some things are picked up by others readily, pretty subtly, and other things really need to be clearly defined, right? Because what we know is to be clear is to be kind. So undeveloped physical boundaries would look like we're letting other people maybe close talk to us or touch us, and we don't say anything because we don't want to hurt their feelings, right? And so then that creates a lot of anxiety for us, right? Whereas someone who has very developed boundaries would be very like, oh yeah, I'm not really a hugging person, but feel free to give me a high five whenever you see me. So some things have to be clearly stated in order to make our boundaries known, right? So emotional boundaries would look something like underdeveloped would be taking on everybody else's emotions and almost like a contagion, or we sometimes think of them as empaths, like we're really affected by other people's emotions, and if we're already feeling overwhelmed, we don't really know what to do with that, and so we don't really know how to tell other people, hey, I really hear you, I hear that you're in a rough spot right now, I really feel for you, but right now I'm having a really rough day myself. I really want to give you my undivided attention and listen, but right now I'm not in a good headspace. Can we set up a time to talk later? I want to make sure that I can hear you. So there's respectful ways that we can go about relaying our boundaries to others, but somebody with very secure boundaries around your emotional domain you would be very good at knowing when your cup is full and you have a lot to give, and knowing when your cup is empty and you don't have a lot to give. And rather than burn yourself out by taking on other people's emotions, you find a way to kind of protect time for you to recharge your own social battery. Does that make sense? Somebody with very rigid emotional boundaries would be very dismissive of other people's emotions. If other people talk about their emotions, you either disregard them, dismiss them, avoid them, or you might even be that person who talks down about other people who overshare their emotions, right? So that's an example of kind of the whole spectrum, right? All three categories. We're really aiming for that middle ground where we are able to assess for ourselves where we're at. We're taking care of our own emotions. We're being insightful. We're checking in with our bodies, our energy, and we know what we have to give and what we don't. And it prevents us from necessarily pushing other people away or overextending ourselves. There's also intellectual domain. The intellectual domain has to do with being open to other people's ideas, being able to express our own ideas and our beliefs in a respectful way, seeking to understand other people before we're understood ourselves. But a rigid person in this domain would maybe just shut down other people's ideas, right? They don't even want to hear it. They don't have an open mind. Somebody with very undeveloped or porous or permeable boundaries around intellectual domain, that would be somebody who has a hard time necessarily not adopting other people's ideas because they lack the critical thinking for themselves. They just go along with the flow, with what everybody thinks. Oh, you think that's a good idea? Great, I'm going to go with that. And somebody else says something, oh, that's a good idea, I'll go with that. You're very influenceable, impressionable. You don't really form an opinion of your own, right? So those are kind of the two ends of that. Same thing would be true for sexual domain. Somebody who doesn't have good boundaries around their sexual domain, they would have a hard time necessarily saying no if they're uncomfortable with something. They wouldn't really express that. If they don't really know who they are and what they like and where your boundaries are, then sometimes would have a hard time even accepting other people's boundaries or being open-minded to other people's preferences or sexual orientations. As far as the material domain, somebody with really good boundaries in that domain, they would be able to manage their resources well. They would be good stewards of their resources. They wouldn't loan out money they don't have. They wouldn't necessarily ask for money when they don't need it. So a lot of financial kind of literacy, respect, as well as managing our own property, right? So material boundaries too has a lot to do with budgeting and being responsible, and also with your possessions, and just being really good about those things. Time boundaries. The time domain is a really important one, and that has to do with not overextending ourselves. If you have really loose boundaries, you might overextend yourself. You might overcommit to things because you don't want to say no. You might be a yes person, and you just spread yourself too thin because you want to make everybody happy. You want to be helpful, but at the same time, that can set you up to either be resentful because then your own needs don't get met, or you just burn out, right? Same would be true if you're too rigid, right? If you have really rigid boundaries in the time domain, then you oftentimes will shut other people down. If they ask for your time, you don't really extend yourself, and that can damage your relationships because all relationships are give and take. So if you have healthy boundaries, then you know how to prioritize what's important, what's urgent. Just like money, you have disposable money, you have your fixed expenses. Time is a lot like money. Then you would know kind of, okay, so I have these responsibilities. I need a time block for those things. This is my disposable time. How would I like to use that to give, right? How do I give this to others? How can I be of service? But you do it in a very intentional way that's in line with your values, so that when you are committing your time to other people, it's done in such a meaningful way, and ideally in a reciprocal fashion, so that you're pouring yourself into other relationships that also give back, and they're not just taking your time all the time. But hopefully that's helpful. These are the boundary domains. I have a handout if you want to check out the link in the description. It's there. If you're a therapist, it's a great handout I made for you. Share it with your clients. Have a discussion around boundaries and what healthy boundary setting looks like. Okay? And if you want to check out more on boundaries, I have another video, goes a little more in depth. Be sure to check it out up here. It's all about boundaries and boundary setting and the nuances there, because life is all about relationships, and we want to make sure that we are mastering this area of interpersonal effectiveness and boundaries, and then everything else gets a little easier. All right, so there's another tool to help you thrive. Until next time, keep serving. Bye-bye.